Welcome back to Cannabis Coast to Coast News. This is the C Block in the final section of this week's show. One Midwest state that continues to make it more and more difficult to launch a cannabis business is Nebraska. First, it took a series of lawsuits just to ratify the ballot questions that passed last year. Now, the Nebraska Medical Cannabis Commission is making more changes to those laws. They are already limiting the number of medical dispensaries, and now they are also putting limits on the amount of licensed doctors can prescribe. And now they are banning all infused edibles. So you can add that to the list of no vaping, no smoking, and you are limited to purchasing 5 milligram tablets. The weird thing is that you can possess up to 5 ounces of the plant medicine. So how are you going to consume it is going to be a real challenge in Nebraska. Krista Eggers is the head of the Nebraskans for Medical Marijuana, and she is outraged by these changes. 71% of voters passed the medical decriminalization question at the ballot box. But like so many other states, prohibitionists continue to slap that democratic process in the face. Next up, let's check in with Tina Tasaka in Nevada and the Tribal Nations Report.
I'm Tina Tasaka with 420 Technologies, and this is the Nevada and Tribal Nations Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Back in mid-July, I reported on the Omaha tribe of Nebraska and the fact that they are the first reservation within the state to pass comprehensive regulations for cannabis use. Well, there are some updates to share. The Omaha tribe of Nebraska, through its Attorney General, John Cartier, is fast-tracking medical cannabis legalization on tribal land, launching a comprehensive regulatory code when the state implementation lags. Cartier cites looming federal budget cuts of over 30% to native programs and high reservation unemployment, about 60%, as key motivators. He's critical of Nebraska's Medical Cannabis Commission, warning of legal uncertainty and compliance costs that threaten to stall access. Under the tribe's plan, licensing, regulation, and patient access are expected to take shape in early next year, pending the setup of tribal rules and a regulatory commission. A Las Vegas man, Elias Ghanem II, 38 years old, was sentenced to 84 months in prison for running a $1.4 million fraud scheme tied to fake cannabis and restaurant investments. From 2018 to 2019, he raised nearly $1 million for a cannabis company and $400,000 for a restaurant venture, but spent the money on luxury homes, jewelry, and personal debts. One victim, a disabled retired officer, lost $280,000. Ghanem pleaded guilty to wire fraud in February of 2025, and on September 5th, 2025, a New York federal judge ordered him to also pay $1.4 million in restitution. Prosecutors called his crimes greedy and cruel. True Harmony Company, LLC, has opened a 250,000 square foot cannabis cultivation glasshouse in White Pine County, Nevada. Using mixed light technology, the facility aims to improve product quality and energy efficiency. With state licenses secured, the first grow cycle is underway. Local leaders support the project for its job creation and economic benefits, while the company stresses sustainability and compliance. That's it for the Nevada highlights and Tribal Nations. I'm Tina Tasaka with 420 Technologies and Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
And now it's time to take a look at what is going on with the publicly traded stocks in the cannabis space. With valuations crashing and debt coming due next year, the industry continues to operate on hope and promise. If you do get into the sector, you might want to take some motion sickness medication, since these stocks are the most volatile on the market. A perfect example of this is Verano, and Doug Miller takes a look at their wild ride in his High on Wall Street segment.
I'm Doug Miller from Highland Wall Street with this week's Cannabis Stock Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. MSO Verano shares have skyrocketed 178% in the past month, fueled by investor hopes of federal reform and a wave of new dispensary openings. In its latest quarter, revenue slipped 9% year over year to $202 million. But here's the bright spot. Gross margins climbed to nearly 56% thanks to cultivation efficiencies in Florida and Illinois. While Verano still posted a small loss of 5 cents per share, it's an improvement from last year. The company's betting on efficiency gains, new dispensaries, and product launches like vape extensions and wellness items to drive growth. But with 100% of its revenue tied to the U.S., Verano remains vulnerable to federal regulatory delays, while rivals like Curaleaf and Aurora diversify abroad. So let's see how the stock chart looks. It's trading around $1.34, and with its recent run up, it's just pulling back slightly right now. So let it set up and watch for dips and trade smart, lock in those profits because it's going to be popping soon. And that's this week's Cannabis Stock Report. Reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News, I'm Doug Miller.
There's a story emerging in states like Texas whose lawmakers just can't figure out how to regulate the hemp industry without destroying it. Now, a study out of the University of California at San Diego shows that in states where cannabis is still illegal, they have the largest and most successful hemp-derived Delta-8 sales. And then you have states like Alabama, where they voted to decriminalize the plant medicine and start a medical program 4.5 years ago. Patients in that state are still waiting for their first license to be issued to grow or a dispensary to open. So the battle moves to the courthouse, where there has been more lawsuits filed in that state than licenses granted. Right in the middle of documenting these legal battles is our own Jennifer Boozer Stewart, who continues to bring attention to the injustice and dysfunctional state government in her home state.
I'm Jennifer Boozer Stewart, reporting from Alabama for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. As the process for administrative appeals begins for the Alabama Medical Cannabis Program, Alabama continues to wait indefinitely for the availability of medical cannabis after 4 years of legal battles over integrated facility licenses. Already licensed as a cultivator, Antoine Mordican, founder of Native Black Cultivation, has now harvested 6 crops in the last 2 years and still has no way to sell the plants to make this vital medicine available to the people who will qualify for medical cannabis under the Compassion Act of 2021. He also has no way to make any revenue to sustain his historical operation. His hybrid grow facility costs between $5,000 and $10,000 a month to operate and is now staffed largely by volunteers. With plant material sitting in freezers awaiting processing, potential patients are desperate for relief and left hanging with no clear idea of when they can even apply for the program. Worries over the threat of having to destroy degraded plants and losing hundreds of thousands of dollars makes this endeavor by Mordican a daunting one. But he remains optimistic that the end of this stalemate is near and the medicine will be available sooner than later once the dispensary appeals process is completed, hopefully in October. Alabama's sick, suffering, and dying patients are still reeling from the impact of HB 445 on the hemp industry, which is the only access they have had to plant medicine for the last 7 years. The issue of legalization is shaping up to be a major motivator of single-issue voting as we get further into the campaign process in remaining 2025 and 2026 elections. Resources such as AlabamaCannabisCoalition.com and Sweet Home Cannabama Radio, hosted by yours truly, are working tirelessly to keep the citizens informed on over 400 candidates' stance on cannabis and hemp in their effort to assist them in their decision in the 2025 and 2026 elections in Alabama. You can go to the ACC website or our Sweet Home Cannabama YouTube page for more information. Reporting from Alabama, I'm Jennifer Boozer Stewart for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
I'm Alysha Bellamy with Cannabis Coast to Coast News, here with Dr. Dabney. We're at the Doobie Dabbler. It's our second Doobie Dabbler here in Minnesota. And what do you think of it?
I think it's quite the spectacle. I think it's the Minnesota State Fair meets cannabis culture. Behind us, there's an adult jumping area. We've got hundreds of vendors selling cannabis products or cannabis-related stuff, tie-dye. There's medieval MMA, so people dressed up in chainmail and armor with swords, beating each other up. There's some BMX jumping happening over there. Food trucks galore. There's Let's Go. Several stages of live music happening all the time.
Awesome.
Yeah, it's been there's been a couple hot box sessions that have been popping up in an ice house at a old parachute flight preschool. It's really probably one of the biggest gatherings of Minnesota cannabis culture. It's really cool how it's expressing itself.
Yeah. I'm Alysha Bellamy for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
The relationship between alcohol and cannabis is obvious. Both substances have qualities that get you intoxicated. But what happens when you mix these two products? Many doctors report that the effects of using cannabis prior to drinking alcohol enhances your buzz by 8 times. So it should come as no surprise when you hear the results of a study out of Colorado state that claims that subjects who are under the influence of cannabis before they start drinking will consume significantly less alcohol. Participants in this study were allowed to consume cannabis before being served alcohol, and sure enough, those subjects consumed less alcohol by 25%. Amazingly, they were served drinks every 15 minutes until they refused service. Finally, tonight, there's a new poll about legalization that shows that 65% of Americans think cannabis legalization is a good idea. Emerson College conducted the latest poll, which reinforces the results of some of the other polls about legalization in this country. The last Pew Research poll from the fall of 2024 had 72% in support of legalization. The results of this latest Emerson poll shows that legalization approval has grown by 5% since their last poll on the subject about a year ago. So the battle continues in this country and around the world to end cannabis prohibition, and we will continue to share news of that battle. But that'll do it for this week's Cannabis Coast to Coast News. I'm Alaina Pinto. Remember, it's a whole new world of weed out there. Consume it responsibly.
I think I messed up. Did you know there's a place that covers all the cannabis news you need? Pro Cannabis Media is now WPCM TV, your go-to website for things cannabis. WPCM TV is the CNBC of weed, bringing you the latest news you need.
Amy Carter. This week, she reports from inside the State House in Lansing.
I'm Amy Carter from Michigan Weedsters with this week's Michigan Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
And talk shows about all things cannabis.
Well, thank you, and thank you for all you're doing to get the word out. Like, this show is so important.
It all started back in 2018 when Emmy award-winning talk show host Jimmy Young kicked it off with the In the Weeds podcast.
That it's not just any generic paper towel. You do have a brand that you use, right?
Yeah, we live or die by the bounty. I mean,
the quicker picker-upper. I love that.
His mission? Building an army of multimedia journalists and podcast hosts who are documenting the fight to end cannabis prohibition in this country and around the world. Fast forward to today, and we've got the nation's only weekly cannabis coast-to-coast news program with Alaina Pinto.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to this week's Cannabis Coast to Coast News, WPCM TV's weekly production of the fight to end cannabis prohibition in this country and around the world. I'm Alaina Pinto.
Delivering the nation's only TV news-style program. Since June 2021, WPCM TV has racked up over 1.3 million views with 17 million impressions and picked up over 16,000 subscribers on YouTube alone. For more information, contact the team at WPCMTV.com